I got gloves here if it gets too crazy. That's it. Oh man, this. Everybody ready?
Let's go.
Oh, hold on.
Ready?
Sorry, I'm working on here. It's like, what?
I'm about to start. Yeah, we gotta get another one of these. This is probably.
But now I'm like,
Okay.
Court watch is going after this.
Okay, we gotta get a new podium. Just gotta have
No, order one today.
That's the Indian.
Everybody ready? You ready? You good? Yep. All right, we're getting started. Thank you all for coming out here today, and thank you to the people alongside me for continuing to fight so hard for the historic victories on bail reforms that we passed this last session. This is just a hand clap. This is good. I can think of no clearer example of why these reforms were so critical than the fact that just a block behind us, Harvey Weinstein arrived for his trial today under his own power, while Akeem Browder is here because his brother Kalief couldn't afford to go home.
Anyway.
Only about 10 to 12% of people in New York City jails have been convicted and sentenced. The rest are kept there not because they're dangerous, but because they're poor. Today we're at the courthouse to ensure that the new laws are being observed and followed in the courtroom. And it's important to verify that the laws are being acted in good faith, because people are spreading myths and misinformation about these reforms after the fact in order to try and claw back the progress that is made. I have been sorely disappointed to see lawmakers in the highest parts of this state and in this city, and attorneys and DAs speaking as if they don't understand what bail was for and what bail was not for. I want to caution everyone now who is trying to claw back these wins that there are many people decades later apologizing for the crime bill, apologizing for 3 strikes and you're out, apologizing for the abuses of stop, question, and frisk. They have the courage of hindsight. They have the courage of looking back and saying we were wrong. We have the ability to show leadership and vision right now. These calls often happen in times of fear, in times when people are feeling fearful. We make these knee-jerk and rash decisions in a response oftentimes pandering to the fears that people have. Some of those fears are built in real things, and some of them are just a feeling. What I'm asking people to do is have the courage of leadership. No one here wants people to be hurt. No one here wants people to be violent. And I will say this, the people who did the most work on bail reforms live in the communities where the people are going to come back home from. They don't want their families endangered. How dare you continue to risk the brown and black bodies of people simply to cater to people who are afraid? This is a time of leadership. This is a time of unity. And to see people using the fear of anti-Semitism to deal with bail reform is disgusting. Anti-Semitism needs to be addressed. It's been on the rise for the past year or two. It's horrible. Bail reform has been around for 6 days.
6 days.
Where is the correlation?
That's right.
If you want to have a discussion about remand, let's have that discussion. That has nothing to do with bail reform. The fact that people keep talking about bail reform and remand together is proving the point that all of these people were making in the first place. Judges were abusing bail to hold black and brown people in jail. Bail reform was meant to make sure people come back to court. It was not meant to just simply remand people in jail. They are two separate discussions.
Facts.
And attorneys should know that. It's disappointing to see attorneys talking about this thing as it's the same. And it's not. What you are saying is that Harvey Weinstein, who was alleged to have raped and sexually abused women in the triple digits, was not dangerous.
That's right.
And we know he is.
And that his brother, who was alleged to have stolen a book bag, was and deserved to be in jail for years. All of you who are talking about this bail reform and reversing it, that is what you are saying. That Harvey Weinstein deserves to be out free and his brother should have been in jail. That is what you are saying. Bail reform was about making equity for people who are rich and people who are poor. Because here's the rub when they talk about bail reform. What you are simply saying is we should add more money to the bail reform so that people who are rich can pay it and people who are poor cannot. You are saying if you're poor, black, and brown, you are inherently dangerous, and if you're rich and white, you are not.
Right.
The bail for Harvey Weinstein was exponentially higher than the bail reform for Kalief Browder, or the bail for Kalief Browder. And Kalief languished in prison, languished. Harvey Weinstein just walked into court on his own recognizance. Just want to take some time to address some of the myths before we hear for some people. They will try to tell you that dangerous people are being let out of jail. The reality is that bail was designed to ensure people would appear for their court date, not indefinitely detain them. But the opposite has become true, especially for low-income communities and people of more color. It perpetuates a cycle of incarceration. In 2018, among cases that continued beyond arraignment, 76% were released without bail. 22.8% had bail set, and 3.2% had bail paid. New York's bail law has never allowed for pretrial incarceration based on so-called predictions of future dangerousness. Legislators rightly rejected it when they enacted a new bail law in 1971, and they did so again last year. They will try to tell you that there is no judicial discretion with these laws. The reality is that New York's mass jailing crisis exists because judges and prosecutors abuse the bail to incarcerate legally innocent people. The new bail and discovery laws also create more tools for judges and law enforcement to monitor monitor people being released pre-trial. All people facing criminal allegations will now be subject to a range of possible supervision requirements. In 2018, 76% of cases beyond arraignment result in non-monetary release. That is over 100,000 cases where people accused of crimes were released. In that same year, 1.2% of cases beyond arraignment led to remand. They will try to tell you that this encourages and enables repeat offenders. The reality is that opponents are misrepresenting the new bail law. If someone is released pre-trial and gets rearrested for a new felony accusation or for violating an order of protection or witness tampering, they become eligible for bail and pre-trial detention. 86% of people released on their own recognizance showed up for their court dates. They will try to tell you that there are no consequences for criminals. People are innocent until proven guilty. Legally innocent people should not be locked behind bars.
That's right.
Even under a monetary bail system, people who can afford to pay for their freedom are still released pre-trial. So what you're saying is that rich people should be out free and poor people should not.
That ain't shame.
Regardless of the changes, all the charges, Poor people should not have different rights than people with resources.
That's right.
We cannot allow the fear-mongering to claw back against the gains. These laws have been in effect for all of 6 days, and the backlash to them is a knee-jerk reaction. It is clear that we need to monitor their impact before assessing their effectiveness. I also want to make clear that the Office of the Public Advocate will continue to monitor these rollouts of these reforms and will be launching a 5-borough informational session to discuss the laws with New Yorkers in their neighborhoods. What the mayor should be doing is making sure the Atlas program is up and running. He is months behind with the Atlas program, which is supposed to provide continued resources for people who are pre-trial. What the governor should be doing is making sure that other municipalities have the resources that they need, not digging into the fear-mongering. So I'm asking them, the Attorney General, and the DA, who are attorneys, to stop and join us in making sure that people have the real answers to the things that they're asking. Bail reform is a different conversation than remand. Separate them. Separate them. Or you two will be here in a few decades apologizing like people do when they have the courage of hindsight. Have the courage of now. Have the courage of the present.
That's right.
I want people to see the percentages here. This is almost 5,000 people, jail subpopulation impacted by bail reform right now. 5,000 people who are impacted. 914 detained on mandatory parole hold. Had 734 technical parole violation. This is the important one. 891 of those people were sentenced to jail. That's 11%. 90% were never sentenced to jail, but you had them in jail anyway because they weren't rich like Harvey Weinstein.
Right.
And the only time these percentages are acceptable is when they're black and brown.
That's right.
That's a shame.
If these were 5,000 people who were part of our white brothers and sisters on the Upper East Side, on the Upper West Side, this would never be a question. It would never be a question. These are the crimes that are eligible and not eligible for bail. 46 pretrial misdemeanor or lesser. That's 324. The blue is must be released pretrial. The purple is still eligible for money bail or detention. This is 9%. Pre-trial non-violent felonies. Look, the purple changes to the blue for all the people who are concerned. Pre-trial violent or Class A felonies. All pre-trial defendants. Look, the purple is higher than the blue. This is not the sky falling. Right here. This is before bail reform. 105,000 people were released last year before bail reform. Bail reform just makes it 125,000. People don't even know this. So we're calling on the leaders of this state and this city, please stop pandering to fear. Nothing good has ever come out of that. That's some opera? Nothing good has come out of pandering to fear in this city, in this state, and in this country. This is a time of unity. This is a time of courage. This is a time of leadership. We want this entire city to be safe. Before bail reform, people sat in language in jail. They could not go to work to pay their bills. They would lose jobs. They could not go to school to continue their education. Their family bonds were damaged, even though only 11% of them were ever sentenced to jail.
That ain't right.
This is the conversation we're hoping that the media will push.
11%.
This is the conversation that we're hoping we can have, again, to the leaders. If you want to have a discussion about remand, I will join you in that discussion so we can see what it is, but it is not a discussion about bail reform, and shame on you because you know that. You know that. So we're gonna hear from some people right now. Court Action NYC, Zoe Adele. Is that right?
Good morning. My name's Zoe Adele, and I'm the Advocacy and Policy Associate at the Brooklyn Community Bail Fund, one of the core organizations of Court Watch NYC, along with Vocal and Five Borough Defenders. From 2015 to 2019, the Brooklyn Community Bail Fund paid bail for nearly 5,000 presumptively innocent New Yorkers. For years, the system required money in exchange for freedom, and we paid it to free thousands of our neighbors. In 2017, we started Court Watch NYC with Vocal and Five Borough Defenders to harness the power of New Yorkers to organize for transformative change and hold court actors accountable to ending the injustices in the criminal legal system that target Black, Brown, Indigenous, immigrant, migrant, queer, TGNC communities. Over the past 2 years, we've trained over 1,000 New Yorkers to observe arraignments and hold New York City prosecutors, the criminal legal system's most powerful actors, accountable. During that time, we've seen hundreds of families torn apart by pretrial detention. Through our work as a bail fund and through Court Watch NYC, we are intimately familiar with the money bail system. For decades, New York's money bail system has violated the presumption of innocence, criminalized poverty, and devastated families and communities. In 2019, New York State passed historic bail reform that begins to topple the two-tiered system of justice in which the wealthy pay bail and go home, and poor people languish in jail. On January 1st, New York implemented new bail laws that begin to address the racism and classism of a system that have devastated low-income communities and communities of color. It is with this commitment to fairness and justice that we find it deeply unsettling that just days into implementing these historic reforms, law enforcement has been using right-wing media to bash the reforms, and shameless politicians are expressing an openness to roll back what New Yorkers fought for and won.
That ain't right.
That ain't right.
Today, we are proud to stand with our friends and allies to officially launch the Court Watch NYC Eyes on 2020 First 100 Days of Bail Reform campaign to ensure systems actors in Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Queens are held accountable to implementing these urgent and important changes to New York bail laws. We launched the campaign digitally on January 1st, and in the first week of bail reform, we've already seen the law do what was intended. During a 3-hour court watching shift in Manhattan last week, court watchers watched as the judge released everyone who was arraigned. That's dozens of people able to return home to their families, not subject to the emotional and physical abuse of pretrial jailing, simply for the inability to purchase their freedom. On the other hand, we've also seen the system continue to work business as usual. Prosecutors complaining that they're unable to set bail and requesting high bail amounts, and judges following suit and setting prohibitively high bail. We continue to see pretrial detention used as a solution to issues that really require investment in communities, in housing, in education, and healthcare. Throughout the campaign, we'll be watching to call out subversion when we see it. We'll be watching when judges give lip service to the importance of pretrial release, but their decisions reveal their preference for incarceration. We will also be watching when judges and prosecutors impose so many conditions of release that it creates a virtual cage, making the accused's life on the outside unbearably cumbersome. If the new laws are implemented correctly, it's estimated that over 90% of New Yorkers will be released pre-trial.
Yeah.
That's thousands of New Yorkers who can return home to their loved ones instead of being subjected to the deadly violence and neglect of New York's jails. This is a huge step forward. Yet, bail reform still leaves the money bail system and wealth-based detention in place. Court Watch NYC will also continue to push judges and prosecutors to use their discretionary power to grant pretrial freedom to all New Yorkers, so no one is locked up while awaiting trial. Thank you.
When I say people, you say power. People, power. People, power. When I say people, you say power. People, power. People, power.
And I would say what this also is a request to have speedy trials.
Yes, yes,
Why don't you just speed up the trials
yes.
so we wouldn't have to have these conversations in the first place? Next up, we'll hear from Akeem Browder, who has been a stalwart on these issues, and sadly, it is his brother that shows the massive juxtaposition here today as he stands with us and Harvey Weinstein is about a block away. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, New York City. Good morning, everyone in your cities and respective towns, areas. We're talking about bail as though that is the only tool that the judges have in their power to keep the community safe, whereas the DAs are to keep the community safe. And that is not the only tool that they have. But for my brother, that was the tool that they pushed on him. No bail for a person that is poor, coming from the Bronx, that is black and brown. But Kalief wasn't the only victim in that injustice. My mother and our family's mothers that goes through life fighting for their kids behind bars, fighting for their loved ones behind bars, while they're innocent until proven guilty. That's the main part. This country has a premise that we are innocent until proven guilty, but it's only for certain people.
Yeah.
And that hasn't been prevalent in our communities. In our communities, we get high Trump charges so that we can then, or they can then give us lower charges so that you can plea out to something while you sit in facilities like this in Rikers Island, because that's torture. To put you in solitary confinement before you're even assumed or pled guilty to, or even found guilty, you're sitting in solitary confinement. Why are we torturing people, period? Why are we allowing this to happen? It's because of the fear that's put in place into New Yorkers every day, that you will be the next victim. And it's not true. There's many people, as we already seen that our brother just pointed out, 11% of those are sentenced. Kalief wasn't even one of those 11%, but spent 3 years on Rikers Island, being beat, being starved, malnutritioned, jumped by guards and inmates alike. Why does a child have to go through this? Why does a mother have to suffer and watch her kid on visit days once or twice a week? Why do we have to go through this? We don't have to anymore. We have a bail structure in set, and we can get better with it, but not go backwards. We're not looking to go backwards when our kids and our family members are still inside, when they're innocent until proven guilty. Yet Harvey Weinstein was a part of the documentary that we did for Kalief. And when he was bailed out on a $1 million bail, on June 6th, the day that Kalief took his life, he then fled the country and attempted suicide. When my brother committed suicide because of the 3 years, when this man did not even 1 hour.
That's not right.
It's not fair for what happens to people when they're poor, but can happen to someone that's rich, and they can come through these doors as a free man.
Yeah.
It's disgusting how the celebrities or those with money can be treated with privilege, and we can't have any or equality or even some sort of equity in law. I speak for my brother and for those that have been through the injustice system. Not because of just what Kalief went through, but we see it day in and day out with the Kalief Browder Foundation. We are constantly hearing stories that makes no sense. Why are you still in jail after 3 years? Not Kalief, but other young men and women. I'm grateful for Jumaane Williams as our public advocate, to use his platform to speak for justice and to speak truth into our system, which doesn't want to hear it. It's not that the attorneys don't know the law. It's not that the judges don't know that they have other tools in their belt. They choose to do otherwise and use you in your homes to be fearful of people called criminals. They're not criminals. They're innocent until proven guilty. That means they're detainees, not criminals or felons or or convicts, which you fear. There's no need to fear anymore, people. There's everyone behind us and everyone in your neighborhoods, and we're advocating for no more repeal. No repeal, period. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have up Assemblymember Dan Quart and Tiffany Caban, who ran a very spirited campaign on these very issues.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you, Jumaane, for your leadership in bringing us here today. In the courtroom and in the legislature and political life, you really know how important something is by how much your adversaries want to prevent you from having it. There was... In my 8 years in the legislature, there may not have been a greater fight than the fight to keep dangerousness, to keep a public safety exception out of the bail laws. It wasn't rushed. It was 53 years in the making.
That's right.
We argued about this in March. We had the courage to pass it in April. What was true in April did not become less true in December or 6 days into January of this year. Jumaane put it very well. Is there a single standard of justice? Does the presumption of innocence exist for all of us? Not just for my constituents in East Side of Manhattan, but for 10 blocks north of me in East Harlem. Is it a single standard that applies to everyone, or only the few, the privileged, those with money and power? It was my hope as the legislative session returns tomorrow that we could go up there and fight the new fights on reforming 50A, police accountability, releasing aging people from prison, and of course, stopping solitary confinement.
That's right.
But we can't only do that. Unfortunately, the regressive and punitive and carceral voices have to be responded to. There has to be a rejoinder. The worst thing we can do in politics is pretend we're not in a fight when we are. So we will go back to Albany. We will fight. We will stand up. We will continue to stand up for the just and equitable bill that we passed in April. No watered-down amendments. No technical changes that exist that actually substantively destroy the law as it was written. No change in the law. It applies as is.
That's right. All right.
Thank you. I have spent the last 7 years in the halls and courtrooms of this building right here, watching increasing numbers of black and brown and poor New Yorkers behind bars, their families devastated because they simply could not afford bail, because they struggle with poverty, mental health, or substance use issues. Meanwhile, the white, the wealthy, and the well-connected got to buy their constitutional right to the presumption of innocence. The onus is on our DAs, on our judges, to make sure that we are getting cases out of the system that never belonged there in the first place, and that we are moving cases to resolution along quickly. The idea that we should be adding dangerousness and the rhetoric that's being used behind it is disgusting. There is no support, no empirical evidence to show that current charges or past behaviors are an accurate predictor of future dangerousness. What we do know is that it gets used in courts around the country arbitrarily, so that predominantly people are deemed dangerous and put behind bars simply because of what they look like and what zip code they live in. We need to understand that fairness in our system, that protecting our constitutional rights to the presumption of innocence, that allowing people to stay in their homes with access to housing, to employment, to health care, that it doesn't come at the expense of safety, it is the source of safety. So we need to make sure that we are working together so that none of these reforms, these really, really important reforms, are rolled back. And so I'm proud to be standing with y'all, and we're going to keep fighting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, we'll have vocal court watcher Peggy Herrera and J. Fredge Abby Stein.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Dear community, my name is Peggy Herrera, and I am a vocal New York leader. I joined Court Watch New York City because I am a survivor of police abuse. and I am currently fighting for justice against the Queens District Attorney's Office. On August 25th, I experienced abuse of power. I needed medical attention for my son, so I called 911. Instead of being helped, I was wrongfully arrested. On that day, officers increased harm in my life and my community. On that day, my family needed a social worker, not uniformed officers with guns. On that day, we needed to remove stigma and utilize compassion. Prior to that day, I had never been arrested. And that's when I joined Court Watch NYC. The unnecessary use of physical force against me and the pursuit of criminal charges is an assault on my integrity and my humanity. I will not stand for it. I have been charged with a crime that I am not guilty of. It's been 4 months and the DA's office has yet to certify its turned over evidence. Yet, because of a loophole in compliance, the DA has 15 extra days to stall my case. My life has been interrupted. My children have been traumatized. Yet I choose to fight back against the injustice in the criminal court system. Because every time I sit in the courtroom, I have seen with my own eyes the shameful games of coercion and preying on the fears and incomes of poor people. The practices are so despicable that yesterday during my third hearing, Judge Lanichi heavily coerced me into taking a plea agreement and pathetically stating the benefits deaf to my cry of innocence.
That ain't right. That ain't fair.
The ADAs at my November noted for the record that I was a member of Court Watch and aimed to coerce me again into a plea agreement in order to minimize political backlash. Every time the deal gets sweeter. But I will not give up. And being a member of Court Watch NYC is what strengthens me in this fight. It lets me know that I'm part of a movement of people who will be the eyes of the oppressed. I'm watching Melinda Katz to see if she will drop the charges against me, as a few of her colleagues, Donovan Richards, Jessica Ramos, Catalina Cruz, and Brad Lander have all publicly demanded. I'm watching to see if ICE will be in the courtroom. I'm watching to see if she'll support the repeal of bail reforms. I'm watching to see if she'll keep her word, and she better.
Yes.
We need our DAs to do the right thing and make sure you keep your promises. So to Cy Vance, Eric Gonzalez, Darcel Clark, and all the DAs in New York, including Melinda Katz, be clear. In 2020, our eyes are on you.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Abby Stein. I am a Jewish trans woman and a rabbi. I want to talk to you specifically about the, I don't even know what to call them, hate messages, where people are trying to divide us and trying to get the Jewish community to speak out or to blame people of color for the rise of anti-Semitism. The rise of anti-Semitism here in New York, for me, is as personal as it gets. I grew up across the bridge in Williamsburg in the Hasidic community. When people say there are Hasidic and Orthodox brothers and sisters under attack, that is not a metaphor to me, that is literal. My 12 brothers and sisters, my 10 in-laws, my parents, my grandparents, my dozens of nieces and nephews and hundreds of cousins all live in the Hasidic community. In 2011, I worked at Rabbi Rottenberg's school, the rabbi at whose house the stabbing happened in Raccoon County. My son lives in the Hasidic community in Muncie. And I am here to tell you that bail reform isn't just not getting in our way, it's the only thing that we can do right now to ensure that the non-stop incarceration of our siblings of color does not get in the way and does not make anti-Semitism even worse. We have heard already so much from the public advocate and from others on why we needed this bail reform. In Judaism, we have a concept of tzedek terdov, justice, justice you shall pursue. But the next two words of that verse is what people miss, which is Lema'an techia, for that you shall live. Our message isn't just that we pursue justice blindly, because blind justice, we know what happened to that. When that building says up there that we want equal and exact justice, I'm sorry to say, but that's a lie. We don't have that.
He's right.
My grandfather is a Holocaust survivor. So are 3 of my other grandparents. So were 16 of my direct ancestors. And so were 19 that were killed. My grandfather used to tell me, and he lived in Ukraine before the war, and even before the Nazis made their way into Ukraine, there was a rise of anti-Semitism. For someone who knows history, Ukrainians were never part of the ideological anti-Semitism of the Aryan race or any of that. What happened was that the white supremacy of the Nazi Party created an environment in which people of all different persuasions suddenly felt that it's okay to act on their hate. That is what we're seeing. Since the current occupant took up the White House, there was a rise of 57% in anti-Semitism. No, not all of them were white. No, not all of them were white nationalists. But they created an environment where that was okay. They created an environment where people felt that they don't have to work on their hate because the government is not listening to them anyway. The only way that we can push back is by having community conversations. I'm here today with JFresh, Youth for Racial and Economic Justice, for 2 years and for more than that. People like Rabbi Barrett and other people through JFresh have been working to make sure that the Jewish community's message is clear. Keeping people locked for as long as you can because of money isn't helping. Jails isn't helping. The United States has the highest rate of incarcerated people per capita, and we have far from the lowest crime rates because they are not just not helping, they are making it worse.
Right.
The only way I as a Jew am gonna feel safer in the city, the only way that my Orthodox siblings and family, the only way that